All right. We are in the week of fear. Here we go. So one of the most interesting perspectives on fear was shared with me almost 20 years ago. I was at a leadership conference, and the guest speaker at this conference was a very high-performing business guy, ultra high-performing business guy. This gentleman was massively successful. And he was just telling stories, about his life and et cetera. But then he told the story of how once he came up with the idea of, he reached out to a professor at his local university, and this professor focused on, let's just call it human performance, right? So this professor had a focus on areas like, meditation, psychology, hypnosis, all these things that can be applied to altering human behavior. And he came up with an interesting idea. He asked the professor what would it cost for him to come spend a weekend with he and his family and just share perspective and ideas, things he'd learned along the way. No structure. He could talk about it whatever he wanted. And at first the professor was a little resistant, says that's not really kind of in the scope of things I do. But the businessman offered him a check large enough to make it in the scope. Anyway, he came, he hung out with him, and they just had casual conversations. He would spend some time with him and the kids individually, and he would just share perspective, mostly at dinner time. At dinner time, he would kind of tell stories and give insights and talk about research. And the guy was just hoping that they would all glean things from this conversation that they could use. And then he said, the guy said, one of the most interesting things was when the professor said, one thing that I've noticed that I've not had a chance to really explore scientifically is that a couple of years ago, he decided to reach back to people who he'd help get beyond fears. Fears like fear of public speaking, fear of flying, fear of heights, those type of things. And he wanted to just circle back around a couple of years later to see if if that fear returned or were they still over it, et cetera. And he said in doing so, he noticed something very, very interesting. He said when he came across people, and in the vast majority of people, the fear was gone still. But when he talked to those people, he came to realize that other parts of their lives had been completely transformed. So he would call somebody and he'd say, hey, and once they determined that, yeah, I'm over that whole fear of heights thing, but let me tell you what's been going on in the last 3 years. I'm out of that toxic relationship. I started this business. I'm doing this thing. I'm all around the world. I'm doing this stuff. And he said time after time after time, once he established the fact that people had truly overcome a fear, when he just started the general conversation of what was going on in their life, all of them, their lives took a spike up trajectory. Like they all overcoming a fear seemed to be correlated to the rest of their life being enhanced in extraordinary ways. And he said, he told the family, he said, I can't tell you, I know there's a correlation, right, between overcoming fears and your life being transformed. I don't know specifically why, but I may eventually put a study around it and see if I can determine what that is. So that's always stuck with me. And he said, hey, if you want to experiment for yourself, find a fear, overcome it, and then see what happens to the rest of your life. And I took that on, and you know what? There is something to that. I encourage you to do the same experiment.